Okay, in this video, I want to talk about downtravel limiters and droop and what is the effect that these have on the behavior of the car. Okay, so a downtravel limiter, in case you don't already know, is a limiter that you put inside the shock body under the shock piston that mounts along the shock shaft. Okay, so if I put a lot of downtravel limiters in the shock, then that literally affects the down travel of the shock. It affects how long the shock is and when it's fully relaxed. Okay, so if I have a lot of limiters in here, it won't travel down as much, and so at full rest, the suspension arm is more level. It's not as relaxed as you see here. Okay, so this is what informs my droop. So droop is basically how much articulation do you have in the suspension arm at full rest. So this would be, say, a high droop setting, and if we put more limiters in there, we can this would be something like a low droop setting. Okay, so what does this do? What it does is it affects the total weight transfer front to rear and left to right. Okay, so again, let's just look at this from the rear, and we'll start here and then we'll look at it from the side. If I have, say, let's suppose as I'm cornering the car, then I find that the car is sliding out. Okay, so it's starting to spin out mid-corner. Now, one thing that I had mentioned before is you can compensate for that by increasing camber gain, because the reason it's sliding out is probably because the chassis is rolling too much. You're riding the outside of the tire, and so the car slides. You can increase camber gain to accommodate that, but if you do that, you end up losing forward bite. Okay, so increasing camber gain comes at the cost of reducing forward traction. But what if I want to increase my side bite without compromising on forward traction? A way that I can do that is by reducing my total droop. If I have a lot of chassis roll, okay, so on this side, the chassis is rolling, that means that on this side of the car is at full droop, okay? If I put shock limiters, down travel limiters in the shocks, what that ends up doing is it doesn't change how much chassis roll I have, but it does change how much the inside suspension arm droops, okay? So let me see if I can get this right here. So let's say the car is at rest, okay, or it's at some value like this, and then as the suspension compresses to the right, you can see the suspension relaxes on the left-hand side of the car, okay? And as it does so, if I take it to an extreme, I can end up lifting the outside tire off of the track. So if I reduce the total amount of down travel in the shocks, okay, what ends up happening, so I have a particular cornering load, constant cornering load. If I reduce the down travel in the shocks, then I end up increasing how much contact patch that the outside tire has, right? I'm just imagining here I'm putting spacers in the shock body to reduce down travel, and then as I progressively do that, right, I see that I go from just touching the inside of the inside tire to the track to touching a little bit more, and eventually I have an even contact patch, okay? So down travel limiters don't necessarily affect how much the car wants to roll, but what it will do is it will affect the maximum droop that the car has, therefore affecting the total contact patch of your tires with the ground. So reducing droop will give you more even contact patch between the inside and outside tire during cornering, and this gives you more grip. Now, the caveat there, the price you pay for reducing droop is that you have poorer or less jumping performance, because if I have less droop, that means there's less suspension travel that I have that can be used to absorb the energy of landing from a jump. Okay, so if I don't have a whole lot of droop, then this is all the suspension travel I have before the chassis bottoms out. If I have a lot of droop, then I have more suspension travel to absorb the energy of a jump. Okay, so droop and or downtravel limiters in the shocks trades off jumping performance with cornering traction. Okay, now that's the effect of droop on cornering, but there's also another effect it has on total weight transfer. Right here, we're just looking at what the effect is of these downtravel limiters on changing the left to right weight transfer during cornering. But it also affects what happens during braking, right? You can imagine if I have a lot of droop at the rear, and as the car brakes, okay, the rear of the chassis lifts up and the front of the chassis drops down as the weight transfers forward. And maybe I find on a particular track that under braking, the car is too loose, it's not stable. Well, one way I can deal with that, again, is to reduce the total amount of rear droop, so that way under full braking, I'm limiting how much weight is transferring forward, right? Because at full droop, if the droop is lower, then that keeps some of the weight back towards the rear of the car. So if I add downtravel limiters to the rear shocks, okay, I'm changing both how the car behaves while it's rolling in the corners. I also change the maximum weight transfer to the front of the car, okay? Likewise, at the front. So say I find that as I'm exiting a corner, what happens as I'm exiting a corner? I'm getting on throttle, so the weight transfers to the rear now, it doesn't transfer to the front. As it transfers to the rear, now the front suspension is relaxing and it's going to full droop. So if you're exiting a corner and you're on power and the car's accelerating and you find that you don't have enough steering, so say the car is understeering on corner exit, one thing you can do is to reduce the front droop. If I reduce the front droop, then the front moves up less. There's less weight transfer from the front of the car to the rear. Another way of looking at that is you get a little bit more weight towards the front of the car because there's less transfer to the rear, okay? So if I reduce front droop, as the suspension compresses at the rear, as the car goes under an acceleration load, that means there's more weight at the front and I have more corner exit steering, there's more front traction, okay? So changing front droop, changing rear droop, it has an effect on how much the weight transfers from front to rear under braking and acceleration, and what that means for braking stability and corner exit steering, okay? So that's droop / downtravel limiters. On 1/10 scale cars, we adjust droop almost exclusively by tearing the shock apart basically and adding downtravel limiters to the inside of the shock body. On 1/8 scale buggies, they have droop screws on the inside of the suspension arm, and you could make those, you can unscrew them or screw them in, and then they touch the actual chassis and basically mechanically force the arm to stop moving down at some point, okay, regardless of the downtravel limiters you have on the shock. So on 8 scale buggies, it's a lot easier to adjust droop than on 1/10 scale buggies where you have to tear the shock apart, okay, but that is the effect that it has, and you may find this to be a very powerful tuning option for you and your track. Now again, droop trades off your corner exit steering with jumping performance. It trades off your corner stability with jumping performance. Okay, it trades off your braking stability with jumping performance. So that's the price you pay, as opposed to something like camber gain. If you're worried about mid-corner steering grip, right? Camber gain gives you that, but you trade off side bite with forward bite in that case. So different setup options will give you different trade-offs. Okay, so this is the trade-off that you pay with Droop. Hopefully this was informative, and of course I'll make more videos on this type of stuff in the future. Thanks for watching.